The needle slipped through Clara Bennett's calloused fingers for the third time that morning, drawing a thin line of blood across her thumb that she quickly pressed against her worn cotton skirt before it could stain the expensive linen shirt she was mending for one of the hotel guests. She sat in the cramped corner of the Dusty Rose Hotel's back room in Silver Creek, Montana territory, where the autumn light of 1883 barely reached through the single grimy window, and the pile of torn shirts, split trousers, and frayed vests seemed to multiply rather than diminish no matter how many hours she spent hunched over her work. The hotel owner, Mrs. Thornberry, paid her 3 cents per garment, and on a good day Clara could mend perhaps 20 pieces, earning herself 60 cents that barely covered her tiny room in the boarding house and left her stomach growling more often than not. She had been doing this for 8 months now, ever since she had arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of broken dreams after her father's death, left her orphaned and penniless in St. Louis. The door to the back room swung open with enough force to make Clara jump, her needle clattering to the wooden floor. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his frame blocking most of the light from the hotel's main corridor. As he stepped inside, Clara could make out his features more clearly. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of countless hours working outdoors, and eyes the color of summer grass that seemed to assess everything in the room in a single sweeping glance. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt, and he wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, his boots dusty from travel and his hands rough with calluses. "You the seamstress?" he asked, his voice carrying the distinctive drawl of someone who had spent their life in the Montana territory. Clara stood quickly, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. At 22 years old, she knew she was no longer the fresh-faced girl she had been before hardship had carved its mark into her life, but she still had her pride. "Yes, sir. Do you have something that needs mending?" The man pulled off his hat, revealing more of his weathered but undeniably handsome face. "Not exactly. Name's James Sutton. I own the Triple S Ranch about 15 miles north of here. I heard from the mercantile owner that you were good with figures as well as needle and thread." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She had helped Mr. Patterson at the mercantile organize his accounts last month when his regular bookkeeper had taken ill, and he had paid her a whole $1 for 3 hours of work. It had been the most money she had earned in a single day since arriving in Silver Creek. "I know my numbers, yes. My father was a merchant back in St. Louis. He taught me accounting and inventory management." James Sutton studied her with those sharp green eyes, and Clara felt a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "My ranch is in trouble," he said bluntly. "I'm a good cattleman, and I can handle horses and mending fences and all the physical work that comes with running a spread like mine. But the paperwork, the accounts, the inventory, managing supplies, and coordinating sales and keeping track of wages for the hands I employ, that's killing me slowly. My last 2 bookkeepers quit because they could not handle living so far from town, and the one before, that stole from me. I need someone I can trust, someone who can take over the entire management side of the operation while I focus on the ranching itself." Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to hire me as your ranch manager?" "I want to hire you to manage everything that doesn't involve directly working with cattle and horses," James clarified. "Keep the books, manage the household, coordinate with the hands about supplies and wages, handle correspondence with buyers and suppliers. It's a big job, and it would mean living at the ranch. There's a separate room in the main house that the last manager used, private and respectable. I would pay you $25 a month plus room and board." Clara's mind reeled. $25 a month was more money than she could make in 2 months of mending shirts for Pennies. It was more than she had dared to dream of earning, but the thought of living on an isolated ranch with a man she did not know, even with the promise of separate quarters, made her hesitate. "Mr. Sutton, I appreciate the offer, but I don't know you. How do I know this is a legitimate opportunity and not something else entirely?" James Sutton's expression softened slightly, a hint of respect appearing in his eyes. "That's a smart question, and I respect you for asking it. I can give you references. Sheriff Morrison in town has known me since I was a boy. Pastor Williams at the church can vouch for my character. My nearest neighbor, Mrs. Catherine Weatherby, is a widow who runs her own ranch with her 2 sons, and she can tell you I'm a decent man who treats people fairly. I'm not looking for anything improper, Miss Bennett. I need someone to save my ranch from drowning in disorganization. And I heard you were honest, hard-working, and smart. Those are the qualities I need." The fact that he knew her name when she had not given it surprised Clara, but then again, Silver Creek was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She thought about the pile of torn shirts waiting for her attention, the 3 cents per garment, the empty feeling in her stomach that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. She thought about the tiny room she rented that was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with walls so thin she could hear every sound from the neighboring rooms. She thought about the future stretching before her, year after year of the same grinding poverty, unless something changed. "I would want to speak with the Sheriff Morrison and Pastor Williams before I give you my answer," Clara said firmly. James Sutton smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer and more approachable. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I have business in town today anyway. Why don't we go together right now? You can ask them anything you want, and if you're satisfied with what they tell you, we can discuss the details of the arrangement." Clara looked down at the shirt in her lap, half mended and waiting. She looked at the pile of work that would earn her perhaps 60 cents if she spent the entire day hunched over her needle. Then she looked back at James Sutton, standing patient and solid in the doorway, offering her a chance at something better. "Let me tell Mrs. Thornberry I'm stepping out for a while." An hour later, Clara had spoken with both Sheriff Morrison, a gruff but kind man in his 50s who spoke highly of James Sutton's character and honesty, and Pastor Williams, who confirmed that James was a regular churchgoer when he could make it to town and had never given anyone cause to question his integrity. Mrs. Thornberry, when Clara had nervously explained the situation, had actually encouraged her to take the opportunity, saying that a girl with Clara's intelligence was wasting away mending shirts for pennies. Clara and James sat in the Silver Creek Cafe, a modest establishment that served simple but filling food. James had insisted on buying her lunch, and Clara had accepted, realizing that this might be a test of sorts, a chance for them to talk more, and for her to get a better sense of the man who wanted to hire her for such an important position. She ate slowly, trying not to appear too eager, despite the fact that the beef stew and fresh bread were the best meals she had eaten in weeks. "Tell me about your ranch," Clara said, setting down her spoon. "How large is the operation? How many hands do you employ? What's the current state of the accounts?" James leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more animated as he talked about his ranch. "The Triple S has been in my family for 12 years. My father started it with almost nothing, built it up through hard work and some lucky years. When he died 2 years ago, he left it to me. I have about 800 head of cattle right now, though I'm hoping to increase that to 1,000 by next spring. I employ 6 full-time hands, plus additional men during roundup and drives. The ranch house itself is solid, built from good timber, with 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining room, and a parlor. There's also a bunkhouse for the hands, a barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings." "And the financial situation?" Clara pressed. James's expression became more serious. "That's where things get complicated. The ranch is profitable, or it should be. We had a good year with the cattle sales, but the accounts are in such disarray that I honestly cannot tell you exactly how much money we made or where all of it went. I know I pay the hands fair wages, I know I've made the mortgage payments on time, and I know we have enough to keep operating. But beyond that, I'm flying blind. Bills come in and I pay them, but I don't have a good system for tracking everything. Supplies get ordered sometimes twice because I lose track of what we already have. It's chaos, and it's only getting worse as the operation grows." Clara felt a spark of excitement despite herself. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been trained for, the kind of work her father had prepared her to do before his sudden death had destroyed all those plans. "I would need complete access to all financial records, all correspondence, all supply inventories. I would need your full authority to make decisions about ordering supplies, negotiating with vendors, and managing the household budget." "You would have it," James said without hesitation. "I'm not a man who does things halfway, Miss Bennett. If I hire you to manage these things, then I'm trusting you to actually manage them. I won't second-guess every decision you make. Obviously, major purchases or significant changes would be things we'd discuss, but the day-to-day operations would be entirely in your hands." Clara took a sip of her coffee, thinking hard. This was an incredible opportunity, but it was also terrifying. She would be leaving the limited safety of town, such as it was, to live on an isolated ranch. She would be taking on enormous responsibility. If she failed, she would have nowhere to go, no money saved, no safety net. But if she succeeded, she would have financial security, meaningful work, and the chance to use the skills and education her father had given her. "I have conditions," Clara said finally. James nodded. "I'm listening." "First, I want a written contract that specifies my wages, my responsibilities, and the terms of my employment. Second, I want it understood that my quarters are private and that my position is strictly professional. Third, I want the authority to hire a housekeeper to help with the cooking and cleaning, because I cannot manage all the accounts and correspondence and also run the household single-handedly. Fourth, I want Sundays off to attend church services in town when weather permits, and I want the use of a wagon or horse to make the journey." James considered her conditions, then extended his hand across the table. "Agreed to all of it. The housekeeper is a good idea. I actually have someone in mind, Maria Gonzalez. She's the wife of one of my hands, and she's been wanting work. She's an excellent cook and very reliable. As for the contract, we can have the lawyer draw one up this afternoon. I'd like you to start as soon as possible. The ranch needs you, Miss Bennett." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, the hand of a man who worked hard for everything he had. She thought about her father, who had always told her that she was capable of great things, that her mind was as sharp as any man's, and that she should never settle for less than she deserved. She thought about the future she had been resigned to, mending shirts for Pennies until her eyes gave out, or her fingers became too stiff to hold a needle. Then she reached out and shook James Sutton's hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip and the strange flutter in her stomach that happened again at his touch. "You have yourself a ranch manager, Mr. Sutton." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Clara gave notice to Mrs. Thornberry, who was surprisingly supportive, and even gave her the $3 she was owed for the week's work, without any of her usual quibbling about the quality of the mending. Clara packed her few belongings, which fit easily into a single worn carpet bag. She met with the lawyer, a precise little man named Mr. Hutchins, who drew up a proper contract that specified all the terms they had discussed. She even used some of her precious money to buy herself 2 new skirts and 3 new shirtwaists from the mercantile, reasoning that if she was going to be managing a ranch, she needed to look professional and put together. James came to town on the morning of the 4th day with a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped Clara load her single bag into the back, and she felt a flush of embarrassment at how little she owned compared to the space available. But James said nothing about it, simply offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. And then they were off, leaving Silver Creek behind, as they headed north into the open country. The journey to the Triple S ranch took about 3 hours, and Clara used the time to ask James more questions about the operation. He answered patiently, clearly relieved to have someone who was genuinely interested in the details he found so overwhelming. He told her about the seasonal rhythms of ranching, the spring calving season, the summer grazing in the high meadows, the fall roundup and cattle drive, the harsh Montana winter when they had to bring the herd closer to the ranch and ensure they had enough feed stored to make it through. He told her about his 6 regular hands, their personalities and skills, and his hopes for expanding the operation in the coming years. Clara found herself relaxing as they talked, her initial nervousness fading, as she realized that James was genuinely kind and seemed to have no ulterior motives beyond finding someone to help him manage his ranch. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, making wry observations about the challenges of ranching that made her laugh despite herself. When he laughed in return, she noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners and the warmth that suffused his expression. And she felt that strange flutter again. Stronger this time? The Triple S ranch appeared in the distance as they crested a long rise, and Clara caught her breath at the sight. The ranch was situated in a broad valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by rolling hills covered in autumn gold grass. The ranch house was exactly as James had described, a solid 2-story structure built from timber, with a wide porch across the front and smoke rising from the chimney. Near the house stood a large barn painted red, several corrals and other outbuildings, all well maintained and orderly. Cattle dotted the hillsides, peacefully grazing, and the whole scene had an air of prosperous industry that made Clara's heart lift with anticipation. "Welcome to the Triple S," James said quietly, and there was a note of pride in his voice that Clara found endearing. As they pulled up to the house, several men emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, clearly curious about the woman James had brought home. James introduced her to each of them in turn. There was Tom Brennan, the foreman, a weathered man in his 40s with sharp blue eyes and a firm handshake. Young Billy Cooper, barely 19, eager and enthusiastic. The Gonzalez brothers, Miguel and Carlos, strong and reliable men in their 30s. Old Pete Harrison, who had been with James's father from the beginning, and who regarded Clara with frank skepticism. And Jack Dawson, quiet and competent, who simply nodded his greeting. "Miss Bennett is our new ranch manager," James announced to the assembled men. "She'll be handling all the accounts, supplies, correspondence, and household matters. What she says regarding any of those things carries the same weight as if I said it myself. She's to be treated with complete respect and given any assistance she needs. Is that clear?" There was a chorus of "Yes, boss" from the men, though Clara could see varying degrees of doubt and curiosity in their expressions. She understood. She was young, she was a woman, and she was an outsider. She would have to prove herself to earn their respect, and she was prepared to do exactly that. James showed Clara inside the house, and her first impression was of comfortable chaos. The front door opened into a parlor with good furniture that was covered in a fine layer of dust. The dining room held a solid oak table that could seat 10, but the surface was piled with papers, old newspapers, and what looked like several months' worth of unopened correspondence. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, but clearly needed a woman's touch, with dishes piled in the sink and supplies scattered haphazardly across the counters. "I told you it was bad," James said, running a hand through his hair with an embarrassed expression. "I've seen worse," Clara lied kindly, though in truth she was already mentally organizing the enormous amount of work ahead of her. James led her upstairs and showed her to a corner bedroom that had a large window overlooking the valley, a comfortable bed with a real mattress, a wardrobe, a desk and chair, and even a small bookshelf. It was larger and nicer than any room Clara had lived in since leaving St. Louis, and she felt tears prick at her eyes despite herself. "Is it acceptable?" James asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "It's perfect," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton." "I think if we're going to be working together closely, you should call me James," he said. "And may I call you Clara?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and James smiled that warm smile again before leaving her to settle in, saying he would send Maria up to introduce herself, and that dinner would be at 6. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her carpetbag at her feet, and let herself have one moment of overwhelmed emotion before squaring her shoulders and beginning to unpack. She had been given an incredible opportunity, and she was not going to waste it. She hung her few dresses in the wardrobe, arranged her hairbrush and hand mirror on the dresser, and placed the small daguerreotype of her parents on the bedside table. Then she went to the desk, found paper and pencil in the drawer, and began making a list of everything that needed to be done. Maria Gonzalez arrived an hour later, a warm, motherly woman in her early 40s with kind, dark eyes and an infectious smile. She spoke English well, though with a musical accent, and she seemed genuinely delighted to have another woman at the ranch. She explained that she lived with her husband Carlos in a small cabin near the bunkhouse, and that she had been cooking occasional meals for James and the hands, but would be happy to take on more regular work now that there was someone to coordinate the household. Over the next week, Clara threw herself into her new role with single-minded determination. She started with the dining room, sorting through months of correspondence, unpaid bills, paid receipts, contracts, and general paperwork that had accumulated in chaotic piles. She created a filing system, organizing everything by category and date. She went through the unpaid bills and discovered that James had been paying late fees on several accounts simply because he had not opened the bills in time. She wrote letters to the vendors, negotiating better terms and explaining that the Triple S Ranch was under new management and would be more organized going forward. She conducted a complete inventory of the ranch's supplies, from feed for the animals to food for the household to tools and equipment for the hands. She discovered redundancies where items had been ordered twice because no one was keeping track, and shortages where necessary items had run out because no one had noticed. She created inventory lists and ordering schedules, calculating what they would need to make it through the winter and into the spring. She examined the accounts, such as they were, and spent hours reconstructing the ranch's financial picture from scattered receipts and James's vague recollections. What she found was both encouraging and concerning. The ranch was indeed profitable, more so than James had realized, but money was being lost through inefficiency, late fees, poor purchasing decisions, and lack of planning. Clara created a proper ledger system with clear categories for income and expenses and began tracking everything meticulously. James watched all of this with growing amazement and relief. He had expected Clara to be competent, but he had not anticipated just how capable she would prove to be. She worked from early morning until late at night, and within a week, she had transformed the chaos of his household into something approaching order. The dining room table was clear for the first time in months. Bills were paid on time, supplies were organized, and Clara presented him with a detailed financial report that showed him, for the first time, exactly where his ranch stood financially. "We made a profit of $1,800 last year after all expenses," Clara told him one evening as they sat in the parlor after dinner, going over her findings. "But we could have made over $2,000 if we had been more efficient with our purchasing and avoided late fees and duplicate orders. This year, if we implement the systems I'm putting in place, I believe we can increase that profit to $2,500, possibly $3,000 if we have good luck with the cattle prices." James stared at the neat columns of figures, shaking his head in wonder. "I had no idea. I thought we were doing all right, but I didn't realize the extent of the waste. Clara, you've done in 1 week what I couldn't do in 2 years. Clara felt a warm glow of pride at his words, but she kept her expression professional. "I'm just doing the job you hired me to do. But there's still a lot of work ahead. I want to expand the vegetable garden next spring so we can produce more of our own food. I want to establish relationships with reliable suppliers who will give us better prices for bulk orders. And I want to start planning for the spring calving season now, so we're not scrambling at the last minute." James leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression that made Clara's heart skip a beat. "I don't know what I did to deserve finding someone like you, but I'm grateful every day that you took a chance on this offer." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that went beyond employer and employee. Clara felt her cheeks flush, and she quickly looked down at her papers. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You gave me an opportunity when I desperately needed one." As the weeks passed and autumn deepened into early winter, Clara and James fell into a comfortable rhythm. They met every evening after dinner to discuss the ranch's business, going over accounts, planning purchases, and making decisions about the operation. Clara found herself looking forward to these meetings more than she should, enjoying not just the work, but James's company, his insights about ranching, his stories about growing up in Montana territory, his dreams for the future of the Triple S. James, for his part, found himself increasingly drawn to his ranch manager in ways that had nothing to do with her professional competence. He noticed the way the lamplight caught in her chestnut hair when she leaned over the ledgers, the delicate curve of her neck when she bent her head to write, the quick intelligence in her hazel eyes when she made a particularly shrewd observation about the accounts. He found excuses to spend time near the house when he should have been out with the hands, and he caught himself watching for her to appear on the porch each morning, waiting for her smile of greeting that had become the best part of his day. The hands had quickly come to respect Clara as well. She was fair but firm, always ready to listen to their needs, but also holding them accountable for supplies and equipment. She remembered details about each of them, asking after Tom's rheumatism when the weather turned cold, praising Billy's improvement with the horses, thanking Miguel and Carlos for their help repairing the henhouse. Even old Pete, the most skeptical, grudgingly admitted that having Clara manage things had made everyone's lives easier. Winter arrived in earnest in mid-November, bringing snow and cold winds that howled down from the mountains. The ranch settled into its winter routine, with the cattle brought closer to the buildings and the hands spending more time on maintenance and repairs than on range work. Clara worked with Maria to prepare for the Thanksgiving holiday, and she convinced James to invite all the hands to eat at the main house rather than in the bunkhouse, wanting to create a sense of family and community. The Thanksgiving dinner was a grand success, with Maria and Clara preparing a feast of roasted chickens, potatoes, vegetables from the cold cellar, fresh bread, and apple pies. The hands were initially awkward about eating in the main house, but Clara and Maria's warm hospitality soon put them at ease, and the evening filled with laughter and storytelling. James sat at the head of the table with Clara at the other end, and several times during the meal, their eyes met across the length of the table, sharing secret smiles that spoke of their growing connection. After the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Maria had gone home to her cabin, Clara and James found themselves alone in the parlor, the fire crackling warmly and the snow falling softly outside the windows. Clara was curled up in one of the armchairs, unusually relaxed after the successful dinner, and James sat in the chair opposite her, watching the firelight play across her face. "Thank you for today," James said quietly. "My father used to have Thanksgiving dinners like that when my mother was still alive. It felt good to bring that tradition back." Clara looked at him with soft eyes. "Tell me about your mother. You don't talk about her much." James was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "She died when I was 14. Influenza swept through the territory that year, and she was one of many who didn't make it. My father was devastated. He loved her more than life itself. And when she died, something in him died too. He kept working, kept building the ranch, but the joy went out of it for him. He died 6 years later, and I sometimes think he just gave up, that he was tired of living without her." Clara's heart ached at the pain in James's voice. "That's a beautiful kind of love, in a way. Tragic, but beautiful." James turned to look at her directly. "I used to think I would never find that kind of love. The ranch took all my time and energy, and the few women I met in town never seemed interested in the hard life of ranching. But lately, I've been thinking differently." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The air in the room seemed charged with unspoken emotion, and she knew that they were approaching a turning point in their relationship. "What changed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so that their faces were level. His green eyes were intense in the firelight, full of emotion. "You changed everything, Clara. These past months with you here have been the happiest I've had since my father died. It's not just that you've brought order to the chaos or that the ranch is running better than it ever has. It's that you've brought light and warmth and purpose to this house and to my life. I wake up every morning eager to see you, and I go to bed every night thinking about you. I know this might be inappropriate given that you work for me, and if I'm wrong about what I think I've seen in your eyes when you look at me, then I apologize and will never speak of this again. But Clara, I have to tell you that I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. She reached out and cupped James's face in her hand, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "You're not wrong," she whispered. "I feel it too. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just respect for a good man who gave me a chance when I needed it. But it's so much more than that, James. You're kind and honest and hardworking, and you treat everyone with respect and fairness. You've made me feel valued and safe and happy in a way I haven't felt since my father died. I'm falling in love with you too." James's expression transformed with joy, and he reached up to cover her hand with his own. "I don't want you to feel pressured because you work for me. We can take this as slowly as you need. We can keep it private if you prefer. Whatever you're comfortable with." Clara smiled through her tears. "I don't want to keep it private. I'm proud of what I feel for you, James. But you're right that we should take things slowly. We should court properly, the way respectable people do. I want us to be sure of what we're building together." James nodded, then leaned forward slowly, giving Clara every opportunity to pull away if she wished. When she didn't move, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to her cheek, and finally to her lips. It was a soft, sweet kiss, full of promise and tenderness, and when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I'll court you properly, Clara Bennett," James said. "I'll do this right." And he did. Over the weeks that followed, as winter tightened its grip on Montana and Christmas approached, James courted Clara with a combination of old-fashioned formality and cowboy practicality that charmed her completely. He brought her wildflowers that he somehow found blooming in a sheltered spot near the creek. He read to her in the evenings from books of poetry he borrowed from Mrs. Weatherby, the neighboring rancher who was delighted to hear that James was courting someone. He taught Clara to ride properly, taking her on gentle excursions around the ranch when the weather permitted, always solicitous of her comfort and safety. Clara bloomed under James's attention. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, to be cherished. She found herself humming while she worked, smiling for no reason, feeling a lightness in her heart that was entirely new. She continued to manage the ranch with the same dedication and competence, But now there was an added dimension to her work, a sense that she was building something not just for the ranch, but for their shared future. The hands were quick to notice the change in their boss and the ranch manager. Tom Brennan, the foreman, gave James a knowing smile and a clap on the shoulder. Billy Cooper, young and romantic, thought it was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. Maria Gonzalez was absolutely delighted and immediately began planning what she would cook for the wedding, confident that it was only a matter of time. Christmas arrived, and Clara and Maria decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and holly, filling the rooms with the scent of evergreens. On Christmas Eve, James gave Clara a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool in a deep blue that matched her eyes. Clara gave James a hand-knitted scarf she had worked on in secret during the evenings when he was out checking on the cattle, and a leather-bound journal for keeping notes about the ranch. "I know you prefer the physical work to the paperwork," Clara said with a teasing smile, "but I thought you might want to start recording your observations about the herd, breeding decisions, things like that, for the future." James held the journal like it was precious, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. She was talking about their future, about planning and building something that would last. "Thank you," he said softly, "for this and for everything else you've brought into my life." On Christmas Day, they attended church services in Silver Creek, making the journey in the wagon despite the cold. Clara wore her new shawl, and James sat beside her in the pew, and anyone who saw them together could see that they were in love. After the service, they had dinner at the cafe, and James held Clara's hand under the table, both of them talking about their dreams for the coming year, for the ranch, for their life together. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, and with the changing season came new challenges and opportunities. Clara had been at the Triple S for almost 6 months now, and under her management, the ranch had been transformed. The accounts were immaculate, supplies were well stocked and organized, and plans were in place for every aspect of the upcoming busy season. James had never felt more confident about the ranch's future, and a large part of that confidence came from knowing that Clara was by his side. One evening in late March, as the snow was melting and the first hints of green were appearing on the hillsides, James asked Clara to take a walk with him. They bundled up against the lingering chill and strolled along the creek, watching the water run high with snowmelt. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of wet earth and new growth. James stopped at a spot where the creek widened into a small pool, where willows were just beginning to bud with the promise of spring leaves. He turned to Clara, taking both her hands in his. "Clara, these past 6 months have been the best of my life. You've transformed the ranch, but more than that, you've transformed me. I was lonely and lost before you came, just going through the motions of building something without really understanding why I was doing it. But now I know. I'm building a future that I want to share with you." Clara felt her heart begin to race, knowing what was coming and feeling a mixture of joy and nervous anticipation. James continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I know we said we would take things slowly, and I've tried to be patient and do this properly. But Clara, I don't want to wait any longer to ask you the most important question of my life. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You're my partner, my best friend, the person I want to wake up to every morning and fall asleep beside every night. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, not just my ranch manager, but my true partner in everything?" Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling more brightly than she ever had. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear and certain. "Yes, James, I'll marry you. I love you so much, and there's nothing I want more than to build a life with you." James pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been restrained throughout their courtship, but now flowed freely. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, feeling the strength of his embrace, the warmth of his body, the absolute rightness of being in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said. "My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to the woman I loved when I found her. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Clara held out her left hand, and James slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and she looked at it through happy tears, thinking about the woman who had worn it before her, the woman who had loved James's father with such devotion that he had never recovered from her loss. She hoped she could be that kind of wife to James, a partner in every sense of the word, a love that would last a lifetime. They set the wedding date for late May, after the spring calving was done, but before the summer work became too intense. Clara threw herself into the preparations with the same organizational skills she brought to managing the ranch, working with Maria and Mrs. Weatherby, who had become a good friend, to plan a simple but beautiful ceremony and celebration. The spring calving season was intense and exhausting, with everyone on the ranch working long hours to ensure that the new calves were healthy and that any complications were addressed immediately. Clara managed the logistics, ensuring that supplies were where they needed to be, that meals were ready for the exhausted hands, that records were kept of each birth. James was out with the herd day and night, but whenever he came back to the house, no matter how tired he was, he always sought out Clara first, needing to see her smile, to hear her voice, to reassure himself that she was real and that their happiness was not just a dream. One night, a particularly difficult birth required James to stay out until nearly dawn. The cow was struggling and the calf was positioned wrong. James worked with Tom and Miguel for hours, finally managing to turn the calf and pull it free. Both mother and baby survived, exhausted but alive, and James staggered back to the ranch house as the sun was rising, covered in blood and birthing fluids and utterly spent. Clara met him at the door, having stayed up all night waiting for him. Without a word, she led him to the kitchen where she had water heating on the stove. She helped him strip off his ruined clothes, then bathed him with warm water and gentle hands, washing away the evidence of the long night's work. James sat in a chair, too tired to do more than submit to her ministrations, feeling a wave of love so intense it was almost painful. "You're going to make the most wonderful wife," he murmured as Clara washed his hair. "And you're going to make the most wonderful husband," Clara replied, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Now come on, let's get you to bed. You need rest." She led him upstairs to his room, helped him into clean nightclothes, and tucked him into bed as if he were a child. James caught her hand before she could leave. "Stay with me, just until I fall asleep, please." Clara knew it was not entirely proper, but she could no more deny him than she could stop breathing. She lay down on top of the covers beside him, fully clothed, and James immediately curled into her, resting his head against her shoulder. Within minutes, he was deeply asleep, and Clara lay there holding him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, thinking about how much her life had changed in less than a year. She had gone from mending shirts for Pennies to managing a prosperous ranch. She had gone from being alone and desperate to being loved and cherished. She had found not just employment, but a home, not just security, but purpose. And most precious of all, she had found a man who loved her for exactly who she was. The wedding took place on a perfect May afternoon, with the valley in full spring glory, wildflowers blooming everywhere, and the sky a brilliant blue. Pastor Williams came out from Silver Creek to perform the ceremony, which was held outdoors near the creek where James had proposed. All the ranch hands were there, dressed in their Sunday best. Maria and Carlos, Mrs. Weatherby and her 2 sons, Sheriff Morrison, and several other friends from town made the journey out to the Triple S to witness the union. Clara wore a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Weatherby had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs and a train that whispered across the grass. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and her chestnut hair was arranged in soft curls with tiny white flowers woven through. She had never felt more beautiful or more happy. James wore a new black suit, and when Clara appeared and began walking toward him, his eyes filled with tears at the sight of her. She was so lovely, so perfect, and the fact that she had chosen him, that she was about to become his wife, seemed almost too wonderful to believe. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the joys and challenges that life would bring. They exchanged rings, James giving Clara a wedding band to go with her engagement ring, and Clara giving James a simple gold band that she had special ordered from a jeweler in Helena. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife and told James he could kiss his bride, James cradled Clara's face in his hands and kissed her with such tender reverence that more than a few people in the gathered crowd had to wipe away tears. The celebration afterward was joyous and boisterous, with a feast that Maria had been preparing for days, music from a fiddle player Mrs. Weatherby had brought, and dancing that went on until well after dark. James and Clara danced together under the stars, and James whispered in her ear, all the things he planned to do to show her how much he loved her, making Clara blush and laugh and hold him tighter. Finally, as the celebration wound down and the guests began to depart or settle in for the night in the barn and bunkhouse that had been set up to accommodate them, James swept Clara into his arms and carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, which was now officially their home as husband and wife. He carried her up the stairs to his room, which was now their room, and set her down gently beside the bed. "I love you, Clara Sutton," James said, using her married name for the first time. "I love you too, James, more than I can ever express in words," Clara replied. That night, they consummated their marriage with a combination of passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies, bringing each other pleasure, and cementing the bond that had been growing between them for months. Clara had been nervous, having no experience with physical intimacy, but James was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished, bringing her slowly to pleasure before finding his own release. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Clara's head on James's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling completely content and at peace. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Clara continued to manage the ranch with her usual efficiency, but now she did so as James's wife and full partner, rather than as his employee. They made all major decisions together, discussing and debating, and ultimately finding solutions that drew on both her financial acumen and his ranching knowledge. The ranch prospered under their joint leadership, with cattle sales bringing in record profits and word spreading throughout the territory about the well-managed operation at the Triple S. In late summer, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure, then told James one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. James's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests to be careful, then set her down and kissed her with such happiness that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "We're going to have a baby," James kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. "You're going to be a mother, and I'm going to be a father. Clara, this is the most wonderful news." "You're not worried?" Clara asked, thinking of all the things that could go wrong, all the dangers that childbirth posed. James cupped her face in his hands, his expression becoming serious. "Of course I'm worried. Childbirth is dangerous, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I have faith in you, and we'll make sure you have the best care possible. We'll bring in a doctor from Helena if needed, and Maria has experience with birthing babies. You're strong and healthy, and I believe everything will be fine. But, Clara, even though I'm worried, I'm mostly just incredibly happy. We're going to have a child together, a living symbol of our love. How could I be anything but thrilled?" Clara relaxed in his embrace, drawing strength from his confidence. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about names, imagining what the baby would look like, dreaming about the future. The pregnancy progressed well, though Clara suffered from morning sickness for the first few months that left her exhausted and miserable. James was wonderfully attentive, bringing her crackers and ginger tea in the morning, taking over some of her responsibilities when she was too tired to manage everything, rubbing her feet in the evening when they ached. Maria also fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate well and rested enough, treating her like a precious treasure. As Clara's belly grew and winter approached again, she found that she had to adjust how she worked. She could no longer ride out to check on things in person, and sitting at a desk for long hours became uncomfortable. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and she continued to manage the accounts and correspondence and planning, just at a slower pace. The baby was due in mid-February, and as the month approached, everyone at the ranch was on edge with anticipation. James had arranged for Dr. Mitchell from Helena to come stay at the ranch a week before the due date, not wanting to take any chances. Maria had prepared everything that might be needed, boiling sheets and gathering towels and making sure supplies were ready. Clara went into labor on a cold February night, with snow falling softly outside the windows. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 18 hours, and there were moments when James, pacing downstairs while the doctor and Maria attended to Clara, thought he might go mad with worry at the sounds of her pain coming from above. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was 14, and his grandmother, who had died in childbirth before he was born, and all the women who faced this danger every time they brought a child into the world. But finally, as dawn was breaking and painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold, a baby's cry rang out from the upstairs bedroom. James took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the room to find Clara propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Doctor?" Mitchell was cleaning his instruments, looking satisfied, and Maria was weeping happy tears. "Come meet your son," Clara said, her voice hoarse but filled with joy. James approached the bed slowly, almost reverently, and Clara pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squinted shut, mouth open in an indignant wail. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that waved in the air, and James felt his heart expand in his chest until he thought it might burst. "A son," he breathed. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Clara asked, though they had discussed this many times during the pregnancy. James reached out to gently touch the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Robert, after your father, and James, after mine. Robert James Sutton." Clara's eyes filled with tears at the tribute to her beloved father, and she nodded her agreement. "Robert James Sutton. It's perfect." James carefully took his son into his arms for the first time, marveling at how light he was, how fragile and precious. The baby stopped crying at the change, opening unfocused eyes and seeming to study his father's face. James felt a wave of overwhelming love and fierce protectiveness, understanding in that moment exactly why his father had worked so hard to build the ranch, why he had wanted to leave something lasting for his children. Everything they did from this point forward would be for this tiny person and whatever other children they might be blessed with in the future. "I promise you," James whispered to his son, "I will do everything in my power to give you a good life, to teach you to be a good man, to leave you something worth having, and your mother and I will love you with everything we have." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Robert was a healthy baby, with a good set of lungs and an appetite to match. Clara, who had never held a baby before giving birth to her own, learned quickly with Maria's patient guidance. James was a devoted father, always eager to hold his son, to walk with him when he was fussy, to marvel at each small milestone. The ranch continued to thrive. Clara managed to keep up with most of her responsibilities, though she delegated more to Tom the foreman and occasionally to James when the baby demanded her full attention. They hired a young woman from town, Sarah Michaels, to help Maria with the housework and to assist Clara with the baby when needed, allowing Clara to maintain her role managing the ranch's business affairs. As Robert grew from an infant to a toddler, his personality emerged. He was curious and fearless, always wanting to explore, to touch everything, to understand how things worked. He had James's green eyes and Clara's thoughtful expression, and both parents were ridiculously proud of everything he did, from his first smile to his first steps to his first words, which were, appropriately enough, Mama and Papa. 2 years after Robert's birth, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Ann, called Lizzie from the start. She was a quieter baby than her brother had been, content to watch the world with solemn gray eyes that reminded James of his mother. Robert was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help care for her, to show her his toys, to protect her from any perceived danger. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. The Triple S Ranch grew in size and reputation, expanding to over 1,500 head of cattle and requiring a dozen full-time hands. James and Clara's partnership only deepened with time, their love maturing from the passionate intensity of new romance into something richer and more enduring, a love built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the intimate knowledge of each other's hearts and minds. When Robert was 7 and Lizzie was 5, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named William and Grace. The ranch house, which had once seemed so large, now rang with the sounds of children playing, laughing, and occasionally fighting. James built additions to accommodate the growing family, adding more bedrooms and a larger parlor where they could all gather in the evenings. Old Pete retired at 75, satisfied that the ranch he had helped build was in good hands and would continue to thrive for generations. Billy Cooper, who had been barely 19 when Clara first arrived, had grown into a competent hand and eventually became the foreman when Tom Brennan retired. Several of the ranch hands married and brought their wives to live on the property, and a small community grew up around the Triple S, with families supporting each other and building lives together. Clara never forgot where she had come from, the desperate young woman mending shirts for pennies in a hotel back room. Each year on the anniversary of the day James had first walked through that door and offered her a chance at something better, she and James made a trip to Silver Creek. They visited the Dusty Rose Hotel, where Mrs. Thornberry still held court, though she was getting on in years, and Clara always left a generous donation for the church's fund to help young women in difficult circumstances. When Robert turned 15, he began taking a serious role in the ranch's operations, working alongside his father and learning the skills he would need to eventually take over. He had his father's talent for working with cattle and horses, and his mother's sharp mind for business. James and Clara watched him grow with pride and satisfaction, knowing that the legacy they had built together would continue. Lizzie surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for veterinary medicine, spending hours reading every book she could find about animal health, and often assisting when the ranch hands dealt with sick or injured animals. Clara and James arranged for her to apprentice with Dr. Mitchell, who was still practicing in Helena, with the understanding that she would eventually return to the ranch and provide veterinary services not just to the Triple S, but to neighboring ranches as well. The twins, William and Grace, were still young and finding their paths, but they brought joy and laughter to the ranch with their antics and their close bond. William was showing signs of being a natural horseman, while Grace seemed to have inherited her mother's love of organization and numbers, often helping Clara with simple accounting tasks. On a warm evening in late summer, when Robert was nearly grown and about to start his own life, when Lizzie was preparing to leave for her apprenticeship, when the twins were playing in the yard, Clara and James sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. James had threads of silver in his dark hair now, and lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Clara's hands showed the signs of years of work, and her figure had filled out with the bearing of 4 children. But when they looked at each other, they saw beyond the physical changes to the love that burned as bright as ever. "Do you ever think about that day I walked into the hotel back room and found you mending shirts?" James asked, taking Clara's hand in his. "I think about it all the time," Clara admitted. "I was so scared and so desperate, and I had no idea that my entire life was about to change. Sometimes I can hardly believe that broken, hungry girl became this woman sitting here with you, watching our children play, looking out over a ranch that we built together." James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were never broken, Clara. You were strong and smart and capable, even when you were struggling. I saw that strength the moment I met you. All I did was give you an opportunity to show the world what you could do." "You gave me everything," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me safety and purpose and respect. But most of all, you gave me love. A love I never thought I would find. The kind of love your parents had. The kind that makes everything else worthwhile." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in brilliant colors, listening to the sounds of their children's laughter and the distant lowing of cattle and all the familiar noises of the ranch that had become home. "I love you, Clara Sutton," James said. "I loved you from the moment you shook my hand in that cafe and agreed to take a chance on managing the Triple S. I loved you when you transformed my chaotic accounts into order. I loved you when you agreed to marry me by the creek. I loved you when you gave birth to our children. And I will love you every day for the rest of my life and beyond." Clara leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "And I love you, James. You were my salvation and my partner and my greatest love. Everything good in my life came from the day you walked through that door and offered me something better. I would choose you again in every lifetime, in every circumstance. You are my home." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and a cool breeze brought the scent of grass and wildflowers, Clara and James sat together in the peace they had built, surrounded by the life they had created through hard work and dedication, and, most of all, through love. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they worked together toward a shared dream. Inside the house, Sarah was putting the twins to bed, and they could hear Grace's protests that she was not tired yet, and William's sleepy agreement. Out in the barn, the hands were finishing the evening chores, their voices carrying on the still air. In town, Robert was courting a rancher's daughter, a smart girl named Hannah, who reminded Clara a bit of herself at that age. In Helena, Lizzie was studying hard, already writing home about the things she was learning and her plans to return and help the ranching community. Everything they had built together, everything they had dreamed of during those early days when Clara was still trying to bring order to the chaos and James was learning to trust someone with the business side of his ranch, had come to fruition. The struggles of those early years, the poverty Clara had endured, the loneliness James had felt, all of it had led them to this moment, to this life, to this love. Clara thought about the girl she had been, sitting in that dim hotel back room, her fingers bleeding from the needle, earning 3 cents per garment, and wondering if she would ever have anything more than survival. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to accepting that life of grinding poverty as her permanent fate. And she thought about how a single moment, a single opportunity, a single man walking through a door had changed absolutely everything. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, sensing the direction of her thoughts. "About how grateful I am," Clara said simply. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built. For the day you took a chance on a desperate young woman mending shirts for pennies and saw in her someone who could manage your whole ranch and eventually your whole heart." James pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "The best decision I ever made was walking into that hotel back room and offering you a job. The second best decision was asking you to marry me. Everything good in my life comes from you, Clara." They watched as the last light faded from the sky, and the ranch settled into its evening routine, the familiar sounds and rhythms that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work to be done, new decisions to be made, but they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that fateful day when their paths had crossed and their lives had intertwined. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and growth. Robert married his Hannah and started his own family, building a house on the eastern edge of the Triple S property, and taking over more of the daily ranching operations from James. Lizzie returned from her apprenticeship and set up a veterinary practice that served ranches throughout the region. The twins grew into capable young adults, William becoming a master horseman who started a breeding program that became famous throughout Montana, and Grace eventually taking over all the ranch's accounting and business operations from Clara, allowing her mother to finally step back and enjoy a more leisurely pace of life. Clara and James became grandparents multiple times over, and the ranch house filled with the sounds of grandchildren during holidays and family gatherings. They took pride in watching the legacy they had built continue through their children and grandchildren, seeing the values of hard work, integrity, and family that they had instilled being passed down to the next generation. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a grand celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the territory to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There was music and dancing and feasting, and countless people stood to speak about how James and Clara had helped them over the years, offering advice, extending credit when times were hard, providing employment, supporting the community in countless ways. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood with Clara beside him, her hand in his, and looked out at the assembled crowd of family and friends. 30 years ago, he began, I walked into a hotel back room in Silver Creek and met a young woman who was mending shirts for Pennies. I was looking for someone to manage my ranch's accounts and household. What I found was so much more than that. I found my best friend, my partner, the love of my life, and the person who would stand beside me through every joy and challenge the years would bring. He turned to Clara, his eyes shining with emotion. You took a ranch that was floundering in disorganization and turned it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than that, you took a lonely man who was just going through the motions of life and taught him how to truly live, how to love, how to build something meaningful. Every good thing in my life flows from you. Clara, I thank God every day for the chance that brought us together, and for every moment we have shared since. Clara stood to embrace her husband, tears streaming down her face, and the assembled crowd erupted in applause. They had witnessed the transformation of the Triple S Ranch over 3 decades, had seen it grow from a moderately successful operation to a thriving enterprise that employed dozens of people and served as an economic anchor for the region. But more than that, they had witnessed a love story for the ages, a partnership that exemplified what marriage could be at its best. As Clara and James celebrated with their family and friends late into the night, they reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled together. From that first meeting in the hotel back room to this moment of celebration and triumph, they had built a life beyond anything either of them could have imagined. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had raised children who made them proud. They had created a home filled with love and laughter. And through it all, their love for each other had only deepened and strengthened. The years continued their steady march, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings. James's hair turned completely silver, and he moved with the stiffness of joints that had worked hard for too many years. Clara's eyesight weakened, and she needed spectacles to read the ledgers she still occasionally reviewed to keep her mind sharp. But their love remained constant, a fixed point in a changing world. They were in their 60s when James finally fully retired from active ranching, turning over complete control to Robert and spending his days puttering around the ranch, offering advice when asked, but mostly content to watch his children and grandchildren carry on the work. Clara had long since retired from active management, passing her responsibilities to Grace, but she still maintained a keen interest in the ranch's affairs and was always available for consultation. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading together in the parlor, taking slow walks around the property, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the valley they had called home for so long. They told stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about how Grandpa James had first hired Grandma Clara to manage the ranch, about their courtship and wedding, about the challenges they had overcome and the life they had built together. On a perfect spring day, when the valley was green with new growth and wildflowers bloomed everywhere, when they had been married for 42 years and had loved each other for even longer, James and Clara took a walk to the spot by the creek where he had proposed to her all those years ago. The willows had grown tall and graceful, and the pool reflected the blue sky above. They sat together on a bench that Robert had built and placed there years earlier, a tribute to his parents' enduring love. "Do you have any regrets?" James asked, taking Clara's hand as he always did. Clara thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "Not a single one. My life before I met you was hard, but it taught me to value what I have and to never take anything for granted. Every struggle I faced led me to that hotel back room where you found me, and every day since then has been a gift. You gave me everything I ever wanted, James, and so much more than I knew to ask for." "You gave me everything too," James replied, "purpose and partnership, and a love that sustained me through everything life threw at us. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like if I had not walked through that door and found you. I would have been half a person, going through the motions but never truly living." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of the creek, the bird's song, the distant voices of their grandchildren playing near the house. The life they had built surrounded them, tangible evidence of their love and hard work. The ranch was thriving under Robert's leadership, with input from all their children. The family they had created was close and loving, carrying on the values and traditions they had established. And their love, which had started as a tentative connection between a desperate young woman and a lonely rancher, had matured into something deep and unshakable, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. "I love you, Clara," James said, as he had said thousands of times over the decades. "Forever and always." "And I love you, James," Clara replied, leaning her head on his shoulder as she had done countless times before. "Forever and always." The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Clara and James Sutton sat together by the creek, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their lives complete. They had taken a chance on each other all those years ago when he had hired her to manage his ranch, when she had agreed despite her fears and doubts. And that chance had blossomed into the greatest love either of them would ever know, a love that had given them children and grandchildren, prosperity and purpose, and most precious of all, a partnership that had enriched every moment of their shared journey through life. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky, they finally rose from the bench and walked slowly back to the house, their home, the place where their love story had unfolded across more than 4 decades. Inside, their family waited, multiple generations gathered for Sunday dinner, as had become their tradition. There would be laughter and storytelling, good food and warm companionship. And at the center of it all would be James and Clara, the foundation upon which this entire family had been built, the love story that had started with a desperate young woman mending shirts for Pennies and a cowboy who had hired her to manage his whole ranch, and had grown into something eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the transformative power of love, trust, and partnership. Their story was complete, their love had triumphed, and their legacy would continue through the generations they had created together, a fitting conclusion to a journey that had begun with a simple act of faith and had led to a lifetime of happiness.